So good morning. Now I'm going to present a paper that is a bit different than before. Here this paper will be about gender role attitude and late life cognition. So while we know that older individuals face many challenges associated with physical and mental impairments, and among these, the age-related decline in cognitive functioning has been well documented. So cognitive impairment, even those not reaching the threshold of dementia, are associated with loss of productivity and quality of life, increased disability, and higher health-related expenditure. So this is a huge problem, this problem of cognitive aging, and we have to see. But now, while cognitive aging is a challenge for both men and women, the incidence of cognitive impairment appears to be more problematic, especially for women. Why so? Because first, women tend to be overrepresented at older age because of differential life expectancy. So we know that the femininity ratio is higher at older age. Worldwide, it was 110 for the 50 plus, but it reached among 200 for the 80 plus. So women are get more older, and so they are more facing the issues of cognitive aging. So that's one first characteristic that is more important for women. But also it has been found that the prevalence of dementia is higher for women than men in most regions of the world. So with increasing discrepancy at oldest age. And on top of that, cognition plays an important role in decision process underlying important aspects of life, such as health management and wealth management. And it is especially important because women, given that they tend to outlive their husband, they have to make all those decisions on their own at older age. So that's why cognition is even more important for women. But most of the literature on gender difference in cognition focus on young adults, and only a few studies have addressed this question at older age. And on top of that, all those studies have been done at the national level, and so it precludes the inclusion of cultural factors such as gender role attitude in order to explain variation in gender difference in cognition. The only studies that have looked at this looked at it on the effect of gender role attitude and cognitive outcome, focus mainly on math and academic achievement at younger age. So with the PISA, for example, survey, where they look at a test score in math and look at the gender gap in math score and correlate it with gender role attitude. They find a small correlation, but it was not very clear. And so it seems that even if they found something, it seems that the correlation seems to be very weak. And you will see here, we will find strong effect compared to what they have. So here, the aim of this study is to analyze to which extent culture affects gender difference in cognition at older age. And we will do this across country, so it will be a cross-country analysis. Here we will focus on gender role attitude that we define as the belief about the role of men and women in society. And the availability of cross-country comparable surveys, including measure of cognition, is quite recent, and it opened the black box underlying the cross-country difference in performance at older age. So the conceptual framework that we have behind this hypothesis is based on the model of human capital, and we can think that culture and social norms could affect individual outcome through at least two channels. One is through beliefs and values. So for example, in a world where there is a gender inequality, or it might affect the preference of the woman, for example, or a belief about her relative productivity on the labor market compared to home production. And she might, if she believes that she is more productive in home production, she might decide not to work and not to invest in human capital, and so to stay at home. That's a way in which norms, cultural norms, might affect behavior and this cognition later on. Another way that it could affect is through institutions, where culture could affect institutions. And so, for example, the development of childcare facilities, which may constrain then women that they will not be able to work and so affect their human capital accumulation. And on top of that, we see that several studies have found that indeed traditional gender role attitude result in substantial reduction in human capital investment and female labor supply. And what we know is that education and labor market participation and lifestyle are protective against cognitive aging. So it has been shown in many studies, and it has also been tested in a causal way, and it has been shown that it was affecting cognition at older age. So in total, the lack of norms and opportunities to engage in cognitively stimulating activity over the life course is thus likely to translate into poorer cognitive performance of older women in gender unequal countries. So for this analysis, I'm going to use a standardized question based on a nationally representative sample of individual age 50 years old or more from 27 countries that are in Africa, America, Asia, and Europe. And I cover about 60% of the world population age 50 plus with those data. So I will use the survey of health, aging, and retirement in Europe, the health and retirement study for US, the World Health Organization study on global aging and adult health, and the English longitudinal survey on aging. So here I'm covering, for example, countries like India, China, South Africa, Ghana, Russia, and Mexico are included in those countries. So, and all of them include measures of cognitive functioning that are operationalized comparably across all surveys. And my sample include people born between 1920 and 1959, and it includes 226,000 observations that I include for this analysis. So for the measure of cognitive functioning, given the time constraint, I will focus only on one specific measure, which is the immediate word recall. And it is actually a test where in front of the interviewer and the respondent, the interviewer named 10 common names, like table, chair, queen, or other. And then the individual has to repeat those words after this. And so this gives us a measure of episodic memory, which is quite a good measure of cognition. And there are other measures, but I will not present it today, but all of them that I have tested also give the same results, so are consistent across all the different measures, such as the executive functioning. So first, let's have a look about the gender difference in this test score across countries. And you can see actually that there is a huge variation across all the different countries. You can see here what is represented there is the relative female advantage in immediate word recall test. So which means, for example, here you have Sweden that is on the top. What does it mean here? It means that on average, women perform 10% better than men on those cognitive test score. So the number of words that they can recall, they recall on average 10% better. And you can see that there is a huge heterogeneity across country, actually, that in some countries women perform much better, but in some countries women are performing much worse. Like, for example, in Ghana, India, but also in Greece or Spain, you can see that women tend to perform worse than men, while countries like the United States, Netherlands, or Estonia or Luxembourg, then women perform much better than men. So you can see that there is a huge heterogeneity, and that's what we're going to try to explain by the way of gender role attitude. So regarding the measure of gender role attitude, we use the word value survey, which is a compilation of national survey on values and norms, and we focus on this question that has been asked in the survey. So when job are scarce, men should have more right to a job than women. So here you can really have this kind of question. It's really putting a hierarchical a difference between men and women should be treated differently. So there is really, this question is clearly putting men and women on a different scale. If you agree with this, you think that men, it's normal that they have more right on a job than women. So this gives a good idea, a good proxy of this gender role attitude. And this question is most closely linked to the gender hierarchical attitude that can create unequal outcome in a variety of domains and constrain women's economic choices. So here, what you can see also, there is huge variation across country. You will see that Sweden and Denmark, there is almost nobody who will agree with this kind of statement, while in Ghana, India, or Poland and Austria, for example, you have much larger share of individuals who agree with this statement. But now let's look directly at this cross-country comparison. What appears when we put all the measure of gender difference and this measure of gender role attitude together. And you can see that there is a striking relationship that appears between here. You have the percentage thinking that men should have more right for a job, so reflecting traditional gender role attitude. And here you have the relative female advantage in immediate word recall. You can see that in countries where nobody thinks that, so who are more equal gender attitude, women are performing much better. While in countries that agree with this statement, you can see that women perform much worse. And you can see that this relationship is not driven by the small number of countries, but this relationship is quite strong and quite significant. So it's not driven by a small number of countries. This is really what appears. And now if we look at the regression on those 27 countries, you can see that here I just replicated what we just saw. I include some region fixed effect at the continent level, and you can see that it does not matter, it remains significant. And as a test also, we might look at the economic development. So I put the log of GDP per capita by countries, so measured in 2010. And you can see actually that it does not matter for the traditional gender role attitudes, still affect negatively the relative female advantage in immediate word recall. So it's interesting to know that if I don't include a measure of traditional gender role attitude, then the GDP will be significant. So it seems it's not GDP that could explain an improvement in women's attitude, but it's really the gender role attitude that is driving this relationship. So now I go at the micro level, where now I look at the individual level cognition. And here it's a bit replicating what we just have seen. So I have country dummies, and I allow the impact of being a woman to vary across the continent, dummy for being a woman, and here I have my parameter of interest, which is the interaction term with being a woman and gender role attitude at the country level. So I correct from the standard error in this analysis, of course, to correct their cluster at the country level. And what you can see here, so I replicate the result on the first, just a replication of what we had before. You can see that women, when nobody thinks that we should give priority to men on the labor market, women perform much better than men. But the interaction term, you can see that it's negative and highly significant, which means that the higher percentage, the more unequal gender role attitude is associated with a lower score for women. And now across the different line here, I include age first to see that it does not affect if I control for age in my regression, it does not matter. Then I look at the mediating effect of education and job market participation during the life course. And I see how much it impacts my coefficient. And you can see that when I include education as a control to see how much it explains, you can see that it explains a bit, so 1/6 of the association is explained by education, but it's not fully explaining all the association that I find. And when you include labor market, so the dummy that say if the individual has never worked during his life course, that's the only variables that was common with all the survey I had. And you can see that it's further explained, but not fully. It's still significant, but still you can see that it explains a bit less than 1/3 of the association is explained by human capital, by education and labor market. So we continue with this analysis, and we want to look a bit further than cross-country because there is a lot of heterogeneity across country, and now we want to also to look about to exploit at the cohort and country level. So we define 3 different cohorts across country. So those born between 1920 and 39, those born between 1940 and 49, and 1950 and 59. In such a way, we can control like fixed effect countries. So in this case, I can control at the country level that there is variation, but and also variation in the effect of being a woman and cognition at the cohort level. And I'm going to exploit this. My parameter of interest is again here. And actually, it exploits the fact that country, I look whether in countries will become more gender equal across cohort. So cohort will become more gender equal. Is it associated with an improvement of the relative advantage of women in cognition. So this is an analysis within countries. So I control for country fixed effect, and it's the change across cohort that is exploited. So this graph gives you an idea about the identification we do here. Is that you can see here across cohorts. So the DK1 is Denmark, the oldest generation. You can see that there is not much variation across cohort in the IDs. They were quite gender equal, the older cohort, and they are still. So there is not much variation in the relative advantage of female. For India, the cohort are all gender unequal, and it did not change. So you can see here the women remain really worse in terms of cognition, and gender attitude did not change. But you have countries who experience a big change in the gender role attitude across cohort. And you can see that it's accompanied by an improvement in the cognitive test score of women. For example, for Greece, also in Luxembourg, you can see that across cohorts, they become more gender equal, and it has been accompanied by an improvement in the relative cognition of women. But now we go for the regression, which can look deeper. And you can see here, again, it's still the same kind of coefficient that appears. It's still highly significant. So now it's a totally different identification strategy than before. Before, it was just across country. Here, it's within country, across cohort. And you can see still the same result hold. And again, education and labor market participation can explain like 1/3 of the variation that we observed there. So it seemed quite suggestive that indeed culture matters in terms of cognition at older age, so might affect your life course and so on. There is still one question that remains, is that we may argue that gender role attitude may not be exogenous, so an attitude may be affected by the status of women. So if the share of women in higher education or women's share in the labor force is low, then the subordinate status may be reflected in their gender role attitude. So you might have reverse causality between the two. So in countries where women perform lower, then people may just say, yes, indeed, they could have more gender unequal attitude. So we try to address this by further looking at a proxy for gender role attitude where reverse causality might not be an issue. And several studies argue that formal religious institutions which shape cultural norms have an impact on gender role attitude. And here we're going to propose to use religion background as a proxy for gender role attitude. In particular, we're going to focus on Protestantism, because Protestantism has been shown to be one of the religions, the mainstream Protestantism, that is the least likely to emphasize traditional role for women among sizable denominations that exist. And during the second half of the 20th century, we know that the Protestant church altered theological practice about the role of women. So, for example, we know that there is an increasing number of Protestant churches that are accepting women into the clergy. For example, we have seen that it's in Protestant countries that the right to vote for women have appeared first. And also, we also saw that in Protestant countries, that's where we have the higher share of women that are in the parliament. So this seems to be a good proxy, but we can check this with this graph, where here I have the percentage of Protestant across country and the percentage that agree with the statement. So it's a more traditional gender role attitude here. So here you can see that in more Protestant country, less people agree with the fact that men should have more right for a job. And you can see that this relationship is quite clear. So it seems that Protestantism is related to gender role attitude. And on the other side, I put the reduced form, which I show the percentage of Protestant, those countries, and the relative female advantage in immediate world recall. And you can see again that in Protestant countries, women tend to perform better. And this is, of course, inspiring in terms of tempting to try to do an IV on that. So that's what I did. So the first stage is just confirming what we have before. So a higher share of Protestant is associated with less traditional gender role attitude. The impact is quite strong. The F-test is large. And the reduced form, where you can see indeed that in Protestant country, the impact on the interaction term is positive and significant, so women are better. And you can see the IV is again highlighting the same result. We cannot reject the fact that gender role attitude is exogenous according to this analysis. A second way, again, one fourth type of identification that I try to exploit there is another way, it's the secularization. So it is the historical process in which religion tend to lose social and cultural significance. So the advantage of this measure that I'm going to use is that it does not vary only across country, like Protestantism, but it also varies widely across cohorts. So I can exploit, again, this change within cohort that happened. So what I use to measure this, it's from the World Value Survey, and it asks how important is religion in your life? Very important, quite important, not at all important. And I compute the percentage who report that religion is very important. And there again, I look at this, so with a country fixed effect, cohort fixed effect, so I look at the change across cohort within countries. And you can see here again, that's what we have. I have the residuals from a regression that take into account country fixed effect and cohort fixed effect. I take the residuals from the variables where religion is very important, and the residuals from the traditional gender role attitude. So men should have more priority. And you can see again that where religion is becoming more important, you have more traditional gender role attitude. And again, here it's the residual from religion is very important, but here is the residual from the relative advantage in cognition of female. And you can see that in cohort country where religion is very important, again, the women, the relative difference in cognition of women tend to decrease. And here is the IV again that I do, so first stage confirmed. So in more religious in cohort and country where religion is more important, so where religion becomes more important, more traditional gender role attitude. So where religion is more important, you can see a negative impact on women's cognition. And again, the IV is significant and negative. So again, in the same magnitude than before. And we can see that, again, we cannot reject the hypothesis that gender role attitude is exogenous. So here, I present 4 types of identification strategy: cross-country, within country, across cohort, using 2 types of religion: Protestant for across country and religion for across cohort and country. And all of them point on toward a strong relationship between gender role attitude and its impact of culture on the relative advantage of female in cognition. So here, that's a bit of summary of what we found. We find that we have quite a robust estimate of the effect of gender role attitude on gender difference in cognition. We show also that education and labor market explain about 20 to 35% of the association, but it's not fully explained by that. It's maybe due to the measure of education and labor market are not perfect. Of course, there is different type of job. If you would need to have the full life history maybe to take this into account. So it might be that, but there is also other aspect that you might take into account, like a stereotype threat. So the fact that if you think that people is not doing well and you tell him, he might become worse with time. So integrating the negative stereotype on you, that could also play a role in that. So in the context of global population aging and increased relative longevity of women, this study demonstrates that promoting gender equality not only has beneficial effect on women's educational and labor market outcome, but also on their mental life in later life. So those results highlight another important aspect to take into account in assessing policy promoting gender equality, especially in an aging society where cognition is playing an increasing role for the well-being of older individuals. Thank you very much.